Invited. You embarrass us. My father's voice pierced the air, loud enough to stop conversations and turn heads. I stood at the front gate of the estate holding the pie I'd baked, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The cold November breeze nipped at my cheeks, but nothing stung more than his words. My hands clenched the ceramic dish tighter, the heat long gone. From behind him, my mother appeared in her burgundy shawl, her eyes darting between guests and the gravel driveway. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she looked down and whispered, "Just leave quietly." That was it. That was all I got. No embrace. No defense. No ounce of warmth from the woman who once held my hair back when I was sick. But then, a heavy thud shook the table under the tent. Silverware rattled, glasses trembled, and all heads turned. "That's enough." The voice boomed like thunder. My grandfather, Edward Langston, the man whose approval this entire family lived and died for, rose from his chair with a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. His hand still rested flat on the wooden table he'd just slammed, his gold wedding band catching the overhead lights. He looked at me, not with pity, not with shame, but with something close to pride. "You don't speak to her like that," he said sharply to my father. "Not after what you did." Gasps. My Uncle David spilled wine on his tie. My Aunt Margaret blinked like her world was tilting. My father's face drained. "Dad, don't start this." But Grandpa Edward was already walking. Not fast, but with the slow, shaking certainty of a man who had carried truths for far too long. He stopped in front of me. "Come inside, Olivia," he said. "You're not just invited, you belong here more than any of them." The world tilted again, but this time in my direction. My hands trembled, still clutching the pie dish like a shield. "Why now?" I asked softly, tears building. He exhaled through his nose. "Because silence has cost you too much already. And they're about to learn what it's cost me." He turned toward the crowd. "You want a gathering? Let's gather around the truth. Because I'm tired of the lies that built this table." And with that he asked me to follow him. I did. My heels clicked on the flagstone path, past the stunned faces of relatives who once ignored my birthday, past cousins who whispered I was the family dropout, past the judgmental stares of people who never really knew me. Inside, by the fireplace, he pulled a faded envelope from his coat pocket. My mother stepped in behind him, looking as pale as porcelain. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the hardwood floor. "I didn't raise my son to be this cold," Grandpa said, staring at my father. "But I'm done punishing Olivia for his choices. Because what none of you know is..." He stopped. His hand shook slightly as he held the envelope. Then he looked at me. "This is about you now. You decide who gets to hear it." I stood there, my throat tight, every childhood humiliation clawing at my ribs. The pie dish was still in my hands. I gently placed it down on the side table, stood straighter and said, "Read it." And that's when everything began to unravel. My grandfather's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The seal brittle, like it had waited years to finally break. The room was so quiet you could hear the firewood shift in the hearth. My relatives were frozen just inside the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave, but unable to look away. He unfolded the papers and cleared his throat, his voice gruff and low. 31 years ago I made a decision I've regretted every day since. A decision to protect the image of this family, at the cost of someone who never deserved the punishment. My father stepped forward. "Dad, enough. Don't drag old stories into this." Grandpa turned sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "You dragged it, son. The day you told Olivia's mother you'd handle things. The day you lied to this entire family about what really happened." He looked back at me. My breath caught in my throat. "Olivia is not some outsider we tolerate out of obligation. She's the only rightful heir to this family's legacy." Gasps. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "What does he mean, heir? Is this about the trust fund? She's not even in the will, is she?" My Aunt Margaret stood up. "Dad, are you saying she's the primary beneficiary?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes. Olivia was always meant to inherit the Langston estate. Not because she earned it, though Lord knows she has, but because it was her birthright. Your father," he pointed to my dad, "hid the original amendment to my will. Replaced it with a draft that left her out entirely." My knees nearly buckled. "Why?" I asked, staring at my father. "Why would you erase me like that?" He opened his mouth but no sound came out. His eyes flared then dropped to the floor. Cowardice in its purest form. Grandpa turned to the others. You all called her a dropout. Lazy. Irresponsible. But did any of you know that she worked 2 jobs to keep her mother's medical bills paid? That she gave up college because her scholarship required family cosigners and none of you, he scanned the room, lifted a single pen? My mother sat down suddenly as if her legs gave out beneath the weight of it all. I asked her to leave quietly, she whispered broken, because I didn't want the fighting to ruin today. I looked at her, eyes stinging. You watched them humiliate me every time and never said a word. Why now? She didn't answer. Grandpa took a step forward and handed me the papers. This is the real will. Notarized. Legal. Effective. You own the Langston property now. And everything that comes with it. The family business. The house. The name. I looked down at it. My hands trembled not from excitement, but from disbelief. Grief. Bigger. The same people who laughed at me just moments ago now looked at me like I was a stranger holding their future. What you do next is up to you, Grandpa said. You can burn it all down. Or build something better. But don't let them write your story anymore. I glanced at my father who still hadn't said a word. I looked at the crowd that had always pushed me to the edge. And for the first time, I felt power in my silence. The weight of the document in my hands was crushing. Every signature, every notarized stamp, every page etched with the name Olivia Langston confirmed what I had never dared to believe. I wasn't an embarrassment. I was the future of this family. I looked up slowly, feeling the atmosphere shift. The whispers had grown teeth. Jealousy, disbelief, and panic hung in the air like fog. Then came the voice I expected, sharp, bitter, and desperate. You can't just hand her everything. My cousin Brad, the golden boy, the next in line, the one who once stuffed my shoes with shaving cream during Christmas because I walked weird, stepped forward. I gave up a job in New York because I thought I was taking over the family business. I've worked my ass off for this family, Grandpa. Grandpa's expression didn't budge. You worked for a title. Olivia worked for survival. Brad scoffed, pacing. She's not even, she dropped out. She's just some waitress with a second-hand car and a podcast no one listens to. That one hurt. I had poured every ounce of myself into that podcast. Late nights. Unpaid interviews. Borrowed mics. I had built a small, loyal following who believed in truth and raw honesty, things my own family refused to value. I stepped forward. You think what I do is worthless because it doesn't benefit you. He sneered. No. I think it's pathetic that you're standing here acting like you belong, just because Grandpa got soft in his old age. That's when I felt it, the heat rising in my chest. Not embarrassment this time. Rage. You bullied me for years, I said calmly. All of you did. Mocked my clothes, my choices, my voice. And now that I have something you want, suddenly I'm worth noticing? No one replied. I turned to Grandpa. Is it true? I control everything now. He nodded, eyes steady. It's all yours. Legally and ethically. What you do next is your legacy. I scanned the room. Familiar faces. Fake smiles. And some stunned silence. Then I made my first decision. Everyone who ever voted to cut me out of this family, I want your keys to the property on my desk by Monday. Gasps again. Brad started to protest but I cut him off. Don't worry. I won't make you work for someone you think is beneath you. Then I added, eyes locked on my father. But if you want a seat at the table you're going to have to earn it. The same way I did. My father's mouth twitched like he might finally speak. Then he simply sat down. Defeated. Maybe ashamed. Maybe just tired of hiding. And that's when I knew. It was over. Not the pain. Not the journey. But the chapter where I stood outside the gate, pie in hand, hoping for someone to let me in. Now, they would wait for me to open the door. The next morning the estate felt different. I stood barefoot in the study, my study now, surrounded by walls of old books and echoes of conversations I was never meant to hear. Light filtered through stained glass windows, soft and golden. The same room that once belonged to my grandfather now belonged to me. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. Taking over the Langston legacy sounded grand when my name was still a whisper in this house. But now it was stitched into every legal document, whispered through family group chats, and etched into the marble plaque at the office entrance downtown. The phone hadn't stopped buzzing all morning. Voicemails from concerned uncles, emails from financial advisors I hadn't appointed, and 3 separate requests from Brad to talk privately. And then came a knock at the door. I opened it to find my mother standing there. No makeup. No performance. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside. She walked slowly, eyes grazing over the study like she hadn't been inside for years. "Your grandfather was always a fortress," she whispered. "But he had a soft spot for you. I should have seen it coming." I folded my arms. "But you didn't. You looked away. Every single time." She turned to face me, finally meeting my eyes. I was scared. Of him. Or of what it would mean to protect me. Her silence answered both. "You used to be proud of me," I said quietly. "Remember the first time I sang on stage? You cried." She smiled faintly. "You wore that yellow dress with the crooked hemline. You were glowing." I blinked quickly, fighting back tears. I didn't want this conversation to confuse me. I didn't want to remember soft things. Because she wasn't soft when they laughed at me. She wasn't soft when she whispered, "Just leave quietly." "Why didn't you stand up for me?" She swallowed hard. "Because your father told me it was better to keep the family from falling apart. He said you were strong enough to take it." I laughed bitterly. I was never supposed to take it. I was supposed to be protected. She nodded. Fully. Then from her purse she pulled out an old cassette tape. "This was recorded the day you were born. Your grandfather, he made this for you." I took it gently, fingers tracing the worn plastic. It was labeled in faded ink. "Olivia, Day 1. He knew they wouldn't love you the way he did," she said. "But he believed one day, you'd fight your way back to where you belonged." I sat down in the old leather chair, the cassette in my lap, my throat tight. "It shouldn't have taken 31 years, I whispered. She nodded again. This time with a tear slipping down her cheek. "No. It shouldn't have." And for once, she didn't try to fix it. She just sat beside me quiet. That night I played the tape. And I listened as a younger version of my grandfather spoke softly into a recorder. "Olivia, you don't know this yet. But one day you're going to remind this family what it means to feel. To fight. To forgive. And when you do, don't let them shrink you again." I sat alone in the dark, hands clasped tightly, and let myself cry. Not because I was weak. But because I was finally allowed to. The air inside Langston Manor was different now. Heavier. Not with tension but with purpose. For the first time in over 3 decades, the estate's grand halls no longer echoed with condescension or cold formality. They breathed. They hummed with a shift so deep, it had begun to rattle the bones of everyone who once walked these halls thinking their power was permanent. I stood at the top of the winding staircase, overlooking the front atrium where a sea of unfamiliar faces had gathered, lawyers, board members, employees from the family business, even reporters who waited silently beyond the wrought iron gates. All of them here not because of Edward Langston or William Langston but because of me, Olivia Langston. The girl they once refused to acknowledge. The woman they now had no choice but to face. I took a deep breath, my heels echoing on the wood as I descended the steps. Each footfall was deliberate. Measured. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the heir, the owner, and the leader of a legacy they tried to write me out of. As I entered the room, every conversation died. Heads turned. Some stood. Some didn't. And then, my father. William Langston. Standing stiffly near the fireplace, jaw tight, arms crossed. I walked past him without flinching. Because today wasn't about him. Today was about drawing a new line in the soil of a family that had rotted from the inside. And planting something new. I turned to face them all. "You all know why you're here," I said calmly but with authority. "The Langston Foundation is being restructured. Effective immediately." Brad, arms folded, immediately scoffed. "So that's it? You sweep in after decades of doing nothing and just take control?" I smiled. Composed. "I didn't do nothing. I survived all of you." A murmur rippled through the room. "You ran this family like a private club," I continued. "Only those who followed the rules, kissed the rings, and kept quiet got access. But no more. The foundation moving forward will fund underrepresented students. The family trust will be audited. The business," I turned to the financial advisor, "will be evaluated for corruption and backdoor dealings." Brad went pale. So did my uncle. My father finally shifted, clearly growing anxious. You're digging up skeletons, Olivia, he said. I'm airing them out, I replied, because I refuse to inherit silence. Then I walked across the room and placed a thick file on the table in front of the board. These are testimonies from former staff members, people who were fired, silenced, or bullied under your watch. I invited them here today too, because if you're going to rebuild something meaningful, you start with the people you buried first. At that, the side doors opened and in walked 4 former employees. One of them was Mrs. Winslow, the housekeeper who raised me when my parents forgot I existed. She looked older but proud. She smiled at me with a quiet nod. I felt my throat tighten. My father's face? White as paper. This is a witch hunt, he spat. I stepped closer. No. This is justice. Then I turned to him, my voice low but firm. You cut me out of every holiday. You whispered lies into this family's ears for years. And when I came back to the front gate with nothing but a pie and an ounce of hope, you told me I embarrassed you. I paused. But the truth is, I reflect everything you tried to suppress. And that's why you hated me. He opened his mouth, but there were no words. Only the sound of his breath, shallow and furious. I stepped back. You are no longer allowed on Langston property without written permission. And your voting rights on the board are suspended, pending investigation. My mother gasped. Olivia. I turned to her gentler. You're welcome to stay. But if you ever ask me to leave quietly again, I'll make sure you're the one standing outside the gate. She looked down. Didn't argue. After the meeting ended, people trickled out slowly, some in silence, some whispering. Brad left with clenched fists. My uncle refused to look at me. But I didn't care. Because in the back of the room, Grandpa sat in his chair by the fireplace, nodding, his expression quiet but full of pride. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the tall windows, I joined him. We didn't say much. After a while, he reached over and held my hand. You did it, he murmured. You reminded them. Of what? I asked. He smiled. That the bloodline isn't the legacy. The courage is. Later that night, I stood on the balcony alone, the wind brushing against my skin. Below, the manor lights glowed like a city in the dark. I thought about every time I cried myself to sleep in a one-bedroom apartment, wondering if I mattered. Every time I walked by this estate, too afraid to knock. No. I stood above it all. Not because I wanted